was born. A bright kingdom was created for the angels. A dark realm for the demons. And a world for mankind. But war, rider of the apocalypse, destroyed the earth before its appointed hour.
In Darksiders, war was the protagonist. It's death in Darksiders 2. How does that change the game?
It changes it a lot, and in pretty much not every fundamental way, but war was quiet, stoic, and very much the tank type that would wade into battle, kind of an unstoppable force that was straight ahead. Personality-wise, Death is more talkative, he's sarcastic, and for personality, that allows us within the game to have more NPCs. I always joke in the first game that War met 4 people and killed most of them. In this one, Death's actually willing to have a conversation because he's a guy that's willing to work behind the scenes and work the scene to get his own way. So you have these conversation trees, and those can lead to side quests within the game from talking to people. But then in combat, rather than being that unstoppable straight-ahead force, Death is more agile and moves around the battlefield a lot more. So he's a more agile guy. He never blocks. He always dodges, and he can leap and skitter up on things. And then so with the traversal and level design, you'll see our levels are more designed vertically because Death can get up into higher spots than War ever could. He's
got 2 very hardcore-looking scythes wielding around. What other kind of weapons does he get to use?
So there's 2 categories of secondary weapons that you find, heavy and light, but then there's different kinds of weapons within each category. For example, in heavy, there's polearm, axe, mace, and hammers. Each of those are distinctive in their own right. So I think everybody will kind of gravitate to one kind of weapon category and then maybe 1 or 2 within that category that they prefer. But on top of that, we have the randomly generated loot system that, there's hundreds of thousands or millions of combinations available. So you might end up going outside your normal weapon preference because it has an ability that you like or want to check out or aren't familiar with, or so there's always a reason to try out different things. But the scythe is definitely our bread and butter weapon. That's his main go-to one.
I had a very brief go earlier, and you mentioned loot, and I only killed 3 or 4 things, and there was an awful lot of loot, and it made me think that maybe you were embracing more of the RPG elements with Darksiders 2.
Yeah, and all that stuff you saw, like the leveling, you didn't get to go up a level or get to choose from the skill tree, but the loot as well. These are all things that we wanted to have in the first game, but just, between making our first console game, a new IP, building the engine, you're out of time, and your ambition gets cut short by, reality, I guess. So, when we sat down for Darksiders 2 and said, all right, what do we want to do in this game? Those were some of the first things that come to the top of the list because there's just... We feel it makes a bigger game. We're always willing to give you new key items that change the gameplay, but now with all those things on top of it, it just adds another layer of there's continually something new to try, new to explore. The game stays fresh throughout.
You talk about new things to explore. I've heard a rumor that it's twice the size of the original game.
Yeah, it's a tricky question. You know what I mean? Because again, we're designing more vertically, and then we have a lot bigger environments. So things are, Death's a big guy, but he'll be dwarfed by these buildings or creatures and stuff. So, it is a bigger game. It definitely is a longer game. But then, putting it into exact multiplier is difficult, but it's definitely a much bigger game than the first.
One of the things that a lot of people will be familiar with from the first game was the puzzles, which were a major part of the game. How are you expanding on this?
So I'd say, again, we sat down Darksiders 2 and we say, you want to add these features, but you still want to make it at its core the same game that people liked in the first one. So we broke it down. We said, all right, there's 3 elements that define what Darksiders is, and that's combat, the traversal, platforming, exploration, and then the puzzle solving. So if you took Darksiders 1 and broke those 3 down to a percentage, say it's 40, 40, 20 or whatever, Darksiders 2 is roughly that same percentage. It's just all those elements are bigger and expanded on. Combat, because we have the skills and the different moves that Death can do. Traversal, because Death can move faster and higher and do more maneuvers. And then puzzle solving gets larger and more intricate by default of the other elements being bigger. If there's more for you to do, more moves that Death can do, it allows the puzzles to have that many more pieces that can be put together as you go along.
I look forward to scratching my head frequently. The first game had a really distinctive artistic style. How are you trying to stay true to the original aesthetic, but at the same time, obviously, do something a bit different with it?
Yeah, I think this game, Darksiders 2, is definitely even more striking than the first. Our first game took place on Earth, and we didn't realize it at the time, but you get a little bit bound by that because everybody knows what a building looks like, a street looks like. So you have to design your game within the expectation of what people know, because you can't reinvent a mailbox. People know what that is. But now with Darksiders 2, we're in the underworld, and we're not just in one place. There's like 5 different worlds that are super visually distinct. You'll know exactly what world you're in the second you're there because of how it looks. But at the same time, nobody knows what the abyssal planes are. We made it up, so we can do whatever we want. Sky's the limit. We can just, you kind of make your own reality, but visually, Darksiders 2 is a lot grander because imagination was the only thing holding us back on designing the game.
The game got pushed back a couple of extra months for polish. What kind of things are you doing to make sure that it's head and shoulders above the original?
Yeah, it's a lot of little details. It's a lot of things that if they weren't there, you wouldn't necessarily notice. But since they are there, it makes everything feel richer and draws you into the world more. So like from a visual standpoint, for example, the demo that you played here today, you're in an ice level. And I've been playing this, consistently for the last month. And all of a sudden, about a week ago or so, there was no snow blowing across the landscape before. Then all of a sudden, there was. And when that happened, that's an example of a little detail we could add in. I was like, oh wow, now I really, this feels like an ice level. I mean, I knew it was an ice level, but now you see that snow, and that's just a tiny little detail, but it really brings the game to life. And then behind the scenes, what it's allowing us to do is, especially since we have loot and there's all these random items being generated, balance is a big factor. So we want to make sure that you're making a weapon choice by your personal choice rather than this obviously works better than anything else. Why would I not? We want to make sure that the balance is there. So it'll be a lot smooth. The gameplay will be a lot smoother, and then visually it'll draw people in more. And that's kind of the main 2 facets that the extra time's given us.
Excellent. And finally, why should we be excited about Darksiders 2?
I'm speaking personally. I mean, everybody has kind of their favorite game genre or anything, but I think what Darksiders 2 does that no other game does is it takes a lot of different elements, more than any other game that I can think of, and combines them together seamlessly. And by doing that, it becomes kind of a genre onto itself. And I think a lot of people say this, but I think it is honestly true for Darksiders 2 is that there is no other game like this. You won't play this. I mean, people say, oh, it reminds me of this, or it has elements of this, but on a whole, it's its own distinct thing that stands apart from any other game out there.
I see you, Rider of Death. You offer so little.
I have an offer in mind.